Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. My name is David Kapianik, and I've been asking myself the same question for 3 months now. What kind of person agrees to spend winter in the middle of nowhere for money they'll probably never live to spend? The answer, apparently, is someone with $43,000 in student debt and a criminal justice degree that's worth about as much as the paper it's printed on. When the recruiter from Helix Dynamics called my crappy Anchorage apartment last September, offering a 6-figure salary for security consultation at a remote facility, I didn't ask enough questions. I should have wondered why they needed a security guard at a research station 60 miles north of Utqiagvik, in a place so remote it doesn't even have a name on most maps. I grew up in Anchorage, but my grandmother Uki always told stories about the old days up north, about things that walked between worlds when the sun disappeared for months, about sounds that came from under the ice. I used to think they were just stories, meant to keep kids from wandering too far from home during the dark season. Now I know better. The Helix station sits on what used to be traditional hunting grounds, built right over a network of permafrost caves that stretch down further than anyone wants to measure. The company moved in 5 years ago, claiming they were studying atmospheric disturbances and geological formations. The local Inupiat families warned them. Malik Akivgak, who runs the supply flights, told me his grandfather actually came out here to talk to the first construction crews, tried to explain that some places should stay buried. They built it anyway. The station itself looks like someone crossed an oil rig with a medical facility. All white panels and industrial lighting, connected by enclosed walkways that rattle when the wind hits. 37 people work here during peak season, but come October, that number drops to 12. By November, it's down to 8. The researchers who stay through winter are either the most dedicated scientists you'll ever meet, or the kind of people who have nowhere else to go. Dr. Elena Okoye runs the night shift operations. She's been here longer than anyone, and she was the one who handed me the laminated card on my first day. 7 rules, no exceptions. Most of them make sense once you've been here a while, she said, her Nigerian accent crisp in the recycled air. The rest, well, you'll understand soon enough. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of 12-hour shifts, of checking monitors that track things the day crew never talks about, of learning which sounds you ignore and which ones send you running for the blast doors. In the deepest part of the bunker is the core, a massive, silent sphere hanging by cables over a dark pit. 99% of the time, the light on its console is green, but every so often, it will turn solid red. No sirens, no alarms. When that happens, you have to do 2 things immediately. First, you close and lock the nearest blast door. Second, you start singing. Anything. Happy birthday, a nursery rhyme, whatever you can think of. You sing out loud until that light turns green again. The new guys always ask why. We just tell them the silence is much, much worse. My first shift started at midnight on November 3rd. Dr. Okoye walked me through the main corridor, her lab coat rustling against the metal walls. The heating system kicked on every few minutes with a sound like grinding teeth. The station operates on 3 levels, she explained, stopping beside a heavy door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Surface level handles communications and basic operations. Sub-level 1 is where most research happens. Sub-level 2. She paused, fishing a key card from her pocket. Sub-level 2 is where you'll spend most of your time. The elevator descended with a mechanical whir. When the doors opened, I stepped into a different world. The walls here were older, carved directly from permafrost, and lined with some kind of reflective material. Emergency lighting strips ran along the floor, casting everything in amber. 7 rules, Dr. Okoye said, handing me the laminated card. Read them. Memorize them. Your life depends on following them exactly. Night Security Protocols. Helix Station, Alaska. Rule 1. Never enter the core chamber alone. If the duty roster shows you're the only person on sub-level 2, wait for backup or radio topside. Rule 2. If you hear scratching from inside the walls, do not investigate. Mark the location on your report and move to a different section immediately. Rule 3. The freight elevator to sub-level 3 is locked for a reason. If you find it unlocked, lock it again and report the incident. Do not use it under any circumstances. Rule 4. If any research equipment begins operating without human input, shut off power to that section using the emergency breakers. Wait 15 minutes before restoring power. Rule 5. Personnel who work night shifts in the deep lab may appear disoriented or speak in languages you don't recognize. This is normal. Do not attempt to communicate with them after 3 a.m. Rule 6. If the core light turns red, secure the blast door and begin vocal activity immediately. Continue until the light returns to green status. Rule 7. Should you encounter any individual claiming to be Dr. Marcus Tuktoyaktuk, verify their identity through the biometric scanner before allowing access. Dr. Tuktoyaktuk died in a vehicle accident outside Fairbanks 3 years ago. I read the list twice. Dr. Tuktoyaktuk. Research can be intense up here. Sometimes people get confused about who they are or who they used to be. Elena's expression remained neutral. The scanner will tell you everything you need to know. She led me to the security office, a small room overlooking the core chamber through reinforced glass. The sphere hung suspended over the pit like a metallic egg, cables disappearing into darkness below. The console beside it showed a steady green light. What exactly are you researching down here? Permafrost analysis, atmospheric readings, standard environmental science. Her answer came too quickly. Your job is to monitor the equipment and ensure protocols are followed. Nothing more. After she left, I settled into the desk chair and studied the camera feeds. Most showed empty corridors and humming machinery. Camera 7 displayed the deep lab, where 3 figures in hazmat suits worked around something I couldn't quite make out. Their movements seemed erratic, like they were dancing to music only they could hear. At 1:17 a.m., I heard the first scratch. It started in the wall behind my chair, a soft, persistent sound like fingernails on metal. I marked it on the incident log and moved to the backup observation post near the core chamber. The scratching stopped. 15 minutes later, it started again. This time from 3 different walls. By 2 a.m., the sounds had spread throughout the entire sublevel. Not just scratching now, but tapping. Rhythmic, purposeful tapping that seemed to move through the walls like something following the electrical conduits. I radioed Dr. Okoye. No response. The deep lab camera showed the 3 researchers still working, but now they were facing away from their equipment. All 3 stood perfectly still, heads tilted at the same angle, staring directly at the camera. At 2:47 a.m., one of them began walking toward the corridor that led to my location. I watched the hallway cameras as the figure approached. The hazmat suit made it hard to tell much about the person inside, but their gait was wrong. Too smooth, like they were gliding rather than walking. They stopped outside the security office door. For 10 minutes, they simply stood there. No movement, no sound, just waiting. At 3:03 a.m., they spoke. Kapianek. The voice came through the door, muffled by the suit but somehow familiar. David Kapianek from Anchorage. I didn't respond. Rule 5 said not to communicate with disoriented personnel after 3 a.m. Your grandmother told you stories about the things under the ice, about the sounds from below. The voice changed, becoming older, softer, speaking in Inupiaq now. Uki always knew. She tried to warn you. My mouth went dry. I hadn't told anyone here about my grandmother, hadn't mentioned her stories to a soul. She's down here with us now, David, in the deep places. Would you like to see her? The tapping in the walls suddenly stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, I heard something that made my knees buckle. My grandmother's voice, singing the old hunting song she used to hum while preparing seal meat. The melody drifted through the walls, through the floors, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. But Uki had been dead for 6 years. The figure at my door began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass wrapped in human vocal cords. They turned and walked back toward the deep lab, leaving me alone with the echo of my grandmother's song and the terrible understanding that whatever was happening here, it knew me. It had been waiting for me. The core chamber light remained green, but for the first time since arriving at Helix Station, I found myself hoping it would stay that way forever. The rest of my first shift passed in relative quiet, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing echoes of that hunting song in the ventilation system, mixing with the wind that howled across the tundra above. When I finally drifted off around noon, I dreamed of my grandmother's hands cutting seal meat while something with her voice sang from inside the walls. I woke to my radio crackling at 6 p.m. Kapianek, you copy. The voice belonged to Malik Akivgak, the pilot who handled supply runs. Got a delivery coming your way. New team member. I stumbled to the communications room, still groggy. Another researcher? Security. Like you. Static ate half his words. Weather's closing in fast. This might be the last run before the real winter hits. 20 minutes later, I watched Malik's Twin Otter touchdown on the ice runway. Engines fighting against wind that bent the runway lights like grass. A figure emerged from the plane, hunched against the cold. A woman about my age, carrying a military-style duffel bag. Dr. Okoye met her at the entrance. Through the surface-level windows, I watched them talk, the newcomer's face tight with concentration as she received what I assumed was the same briefing I'd gotten. Her name was Rebecca Sixenik, and she'd come up from the National Guard base in Anchorage. When we met in the security office that evening, she studied the rules card with the same expression I'd probably worn, skeptical but trying to stay professional. "So, what's really going on here?" she asked, settling into the spare chair. "And don't give me the environmental research line. I've worked security at black sites before. This feels different." I considered lying, then decided she'd figure it out herself soon enough. They're not just studying the permafrost. They're studying what's inside it, and it's studying them back. As if summoned by our conversation, the scratching started again. This time it began in the ceiling directly above us, a sound like branches scraping against a roof. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her hip, where her sidearm would normally hang. "No weapons allowed on sub-level 2, I said. "Another rule they don't put on the card." "Why not?" Before I could answer, the court chamber alarm chimed once. Not the red alert, just a status notification. Through the observation window, I watched the sphere rotate slightly on its cables, revealing a section that gleamed differently than the rest. Rebecca pressed her face to the glass. "What is that thing?" No one's told me directly, but I've been reading the old maintenance logs. I pulled up a file on the computer. This facility wasn't built for research. It was built for containment. The documents I'd found painted a picture that made sense in a horrible way. Helix Dynamics had discovered something in the permafrost during their initial surveys, something that predated human settlement in the region by thousands of years. The excavation reports mentioned organic material displaying organized structure and biological anomalies resistant to standard preservation techniques. Then the reports stopped being technical and started being redacted. "Look at this," I said, showing Rebecca a manifest from 3 years ago. They brought in Dr. Marcus Tuktoyaktuk as a consultant, specialist in pre-Columbian Arctic cultures. 2 weeks later, he's listed as deceased in a car accident. "Rule 7, Rebecca muttered, reading over my shoulder. "Except there's no accident report, no insurance claim, no funeral notice in any Alaskan newspaper." I clicked through more files. It's like they needed him to be officially dead while keeping him around for something else. The scratching above us intensified, joined by a new sound, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to follow the heating system's circulation pattern. Rebecca grabbed her radio. "Surface control. This is Rebecca Sikanik, sublevel 2 security. Are you showing any maintenance activity in the ventilation system?" Static. Then, negative. Security. All systems automated at this hour. The thumping stopped abruptly, but the silence that replaced it felt worse. I checked the camera feeds. The deep lab was empty now, equipment running unattended. That violated at least 3 safety protocols. "We should check on the researchers," Rebecca said. "Rule 5. After 3 a.m., don't try to communicate with night shift personnel. There's a reason for that." "It's only 11 p.m. I pointed to the timestamp on the security monitor. "Down here, time moves differently. The clocks all run about 20% slow. Has something to do with the electrical field from the core." Rebecca stared at me. "That's not how time works." "Tell that to my watch." I showed her the face, 11:17 p.m. The security system showed 9:33 p.m. Been happening since day 1, another thing they don't mention in orientation. A new alert popped up on the monitor. "Freight elevator. Sublevel 3. Unauthorized access." Rule 3. The elevator that was supposed to stay locked. We both looked at the live feed. The freight elevator doors stood open, revealing a shaft that disappeared into darkness. The elevator car itself was gone, either descended to sub-level 3 or hauled up somewhere we couldn't see. "Someone unlocked it," Rebecca said. "Or something did." I reached for the override controls to lock the system again, but the keyboard wouldn't respond. The screen flickered, displaying a message I'd never seen before. "Manual override requested. Authorization. M. Tuktoyaktuk." "That's not possible," Rebecca said. "He's dead." The freight elevator started moving, not up from sub-level 3, but down from somewhere above us. We watched the car descend past our level, past the point where sub-level 3 should be, continuing into depths that didn't exist on any facility blueprint. When it finally stopped, a figure stepped out. Through the grainy security feed, we could see it was a man in a researcher's coat, but the image quality made details difficult to make out. He walked with purpose toward the core chamber, passing directly beneath our observation window. That's when I saw his face clearly for the first time. It was Dr. Marcus Tuktoyaktuk, exactly as he appeared in the personnel photos from 3 years ago, down to the small scar on his chin and the way he held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right. But something was wrong with his skin. It had a waxy quality, like it had been molded rather than grown. He stopped directly below our window and looked up. When our eyes met through the glass, he smiled. His mouth opened too wide, revealing teeth that were definitely human, but arranged in ways that human teeth shouldn't be. "David," he said, and somehow we heard him clearly through the soundproof glass. "You're Uki's grandson. She spoke of you often down below." Rebecca grabbed my arm. How was he talking to us through? "The old woman had such interesting stories," Tuktoyekto continued. "About the time before time, about the things that slept under the ice before your people came to hunt here. She understood what we were long before the rest." The court chamber's console began flashing yellow, a warning status I'd never seen before. "Your grandmother is teaching the others now, teaching them about your family, about why you were chosen to come here." His smile widened further, skin stretching like rubber. "She's very excited to see you again." The console turned orange, then began cycling through colors I didn't recognize. The sphere itself started rotating faster, cables singing with tension. "Would you like to join our classes, David? We have so much to show you, so much you need to learn about what you really are." The scratching in the walls resumed, but now it was coming from everywhere at once. Not random anymore. The sounds were forming patterns, rhythms that reminded me of the traditional drumming from my childhood. But underneath the familiar beats, I could hear something else. Voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all whispering the same word in Inupiaq over and over. Tornarsuk, Tornarsuk, Tornarsuk. Spirit. The word my grandmother had used for things that existed between the living world and the hunting grounds of the dead. The figure below us raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or a blessing. Then it turned and walked back toward the freight elevator, which opened as it approached. Before stepping inside, it looked up at us one more time. "Tell them I'll be coming to the surface soon," it said. "Tell them the lessons are almost complete." The elevator doors closed, and the car began its ascent into regions of the facility, but officially didn't exist. The next 4 hours felt like swimming through thick oil. Rebecca tried reaching Dr. Okoye on the radio, but got only static responses that sounded like voices speaking backwards. The security monitors showed empty corridors, but the motion sensors kept triggering in rooms that appeared vacant on camera. At 3:30 a.m., or what the surface clocks claimed was 1:47 a.m., we heard footsteps in the main corridor. Heavy boots against metal flooring, coming from the direction of the freight elevator. "Someone's coming up," Rebecca said, checking the camera feeds. The hallway showed nothing. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They stopped directly outside our door. David Kaptianek. The voice was different this time. Younger, female, with an accent I couldn't place. "We know you're listening." Rebecca motioned for me to stay quiet, but the voice continued. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I work in the deep lab. Please open the door. There's been an accident." I pulled up the personnel database on the computer. Dr. Sarah Chen, biochemist, stationed at Helix for 8 months. Her photo showed an Asian woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a professional smile. "Something's wrong with the containment protocols," the voice said. "The specimens are becoming active. We need help evacuating sub-level 3. Rebecca grabbed my wrist and pointed at the screen. According to the system, Dr. Chen had checked out 3 days ago for medical leave in Anchorage. Her key card had been deactivated. "David, please. People are dying down here." The voice cracked with what sounded like genuine fear, but I remembered Rule 7. Verify identity through the biometric scanner. I activated the external scanner panel beside the door. "Dr. Chen, please place your hand on the scanner for verification." Silence, then footsteps moving away, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Rebecca exhaled slowly. "How did you know?" "Personnel rotation logs. Chen left Monday on the supply flight. Malik mentioned her specifically, said she seemed spooked about something. What do you think that was about? The evacuation request. Before I could answer, every screen in the security office went black. Then they flickered back to life, showing feeds from areas I'd never seen before. Deep, ice-carved tunnels stretching far below the official facility levels. Chambers carved from living permafrost, filled with equipment that looked nothing like standard research gear. And people, dozens of them, moving through the tunnels in groups. But their movements were wrong, too synchronized, like they were all responding to the same unheard command. "Where is this?" Rebecca asked. "Sub-level 3, maybe deeper." I tried switching back to normal camera feeds, but the controls weren't responding. This is what they're really doing here. One of the figures on screen turned toward the camera. It was Dr. Okoye, but her eyes reflected light like an animal's. She mouthed words we couldn't hear, then pointed upward, toward our location. The screen flicked to a different view, a vast chamber containing dozens of ice-preserved bodies arranged in concentric circles around a dark opening in the floor. The bodies were old, ancient, dressed in traditional Inupiaq clothing that had been perfectly preserved by the cold. "Those are graves," Rebecca said quietly. "Traditional burial sites. They built this place on top of a cemetery." As we watched, some of the preserved bodies began to move. Slight twitches at first, then more deliberate motions. One sat up, ice crystals falling from its face like tears. It looked directly at the camera and opened its mouth in what might have been a scream or a song. The speakers in our office suddenly crackled to life, filled with the sound of voices singing in harmony. The same hunting song my grandmother used to hum, but now performed by what sounded like hundreds of voices, both living and dead. That's when the core chamber alarm began to wail. The light had turned solid red. "Blast door," I said, jumping toward the manual controls. "Help me get the blast door down." Rebecca grabbed the emergency lever on the opposite wall. Together we pulled until the heavy door slammed down, sealing us into the security office. The singing from the speakers grew louder, joined by sounds that definitely weren't human. Clicking, chittering noises that reminded me of insects but felt much larger. "Now what?" Rebecca asked. "Now we sing. Anything. Just keep making noise until the light turns green." "That's the stupidest—" "Rule 6. Just do it." I started with the first song that came to mind. Amazing Grace, my grandmother's favorite hymn. My voice sounded thin and scared in the enclosed space, but I kept going. Rebecca joined in after the first verse, her military training helping her push through the absurdity of the situation. The red light pulsed in rhythm with our singing, but it didn't change color. Through the blast door, we could hear movement in the corridor. Footsteps, but too many of them. Like a crowd was gathering outside our sealed room. "David." The voice came through the door's intercom system, Dr. Tuk Toyak Tuk again, but speaking in my grandmother's cadence. "You sing beautifully, just like Uki taught you." I kept singing, but my voice wavered. She's teaching all of us now. Teaching us about music, about voice, about how to sound human when we need to. The voice shifted, becoming my grandmother's exact tone and inflection. "David, grandson, it's time to come home. Time to learn what you really are." Rebecca grabbed my arm. The core light was still red, but now it was getting brighter, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. "Your family has always been special, David. Connected to the old ways, the old spirits. That's why we chose this place. Why we waited for you to come to us." The voice became younger, speaking rapid Inupiaq that I only partially understood. Something about blood, about inheritance, about things that had slept under the ice since before the first humans arrived. The others didn't understand, The researchers, the scientists, they thought we were specimens to study. They didn't realize we were studying them, learning from them, taking what we needed. A new sound joined the cacophony outside, scraping, like something with claws moving across metal. The blast door shuddered under repeated impacts. But you understand, don't you, David? You can feel it in your bones, the connection, the calling. Your grandmother felt it too. That's why she came to us willingly. Keep singing, I told Rebecca, but my own voice was failing. The red light was getting so bright it hurt to look at. She walks with us now in the deep places. She hunts with us. She feeds with us. And soon, you will too. The scraping stopped. For a moment, everything went quiet, except for our ragged singing. Then something began cutting through the blast door. The metal glowed orange where the cuts appeared, perfectly straight lines forming geometric shapes I recognized from my grandmother's stories. Symbols she'd drawn in the dirt when teaching me about the spirits that lived between worlds. The lessons are almost complete, the voice said, now coming from directly above us. Something was in the ventilation system. The others have learned so much. Dr. Chen learned about patience. Dr. Okoye learned about observation. Dr. Tukto Yaktuk, he learned about identity. The cutting stopped. A section of the blast door fell inward with a crash, revealing darkness beyond. Now it's your turn to learn, David. About family, about duty, about what happens when the old spirits remember how to be hungry. A hand reached through the opening, pale with fingers that were too long and joints that bent in too many directions. It groped blindly for the door controls. The core light suddenly flashed green. The hand jerked back as if burned. The scratching sounds receded. The voices faded to whispers, then silence. Rebecca and I stood in the damaged security office, breathing hard, staring at the hole torn through our defenses. "What just happened?" she asked. "I think we passed some kind of test." I looked at the core chamber through the observation window. The sphere hung motionless again, its surface reflecting the emergency lighting like a mirror. But I don't think it's over. On the monitors, the camera feeds had returned to normal. Empty corridors, quiet labs, standard facility operations. But I noticed something new in the personnel database. Dr. Sarah Chen was listed as present and active again, assigned to night shift duties in the deep lab. And according to the system, she'd been here continuously for the past 8 months. No medical leave, no trip to Anchorage, no break in service. Rebecca saw it too. The records have been changed. Or maybe our memories have. She stared at me. "What do you mean?" What if what we remember about her leaving is wrong? What if she never left at all? What if she's been down there the whole time, learning to be something else? The radio crackled. A calm, professional voice. "Security office. This is Dr. Chen. I'm showing some anomalous readings from the core chamber. Are you seeing anything unusual on your end?" Rebecca and I looked at each other. The voice sounded exactly like the one that had asked us to open the door. But now, it was coming through official channels. Rebecca picked up the radio with steady hands. "Dr. Chen, this is security. We're showing green status on all core monitoring systems. What specific readings are you concerned about?" A pause. Then, "Temperature fluctuations in Sector 7. Minor, but worth investigating. Could you meet me in the deep lab? I'd like to show you something." I shook my head frantically, but Rebecca was already responding. "Copy that. We'll be down in 10 minutes. She switched off the radio and looked at me. "We can't hide in here forever. If that's really Dr. Chen, she needs help. If it's not..." She gestured at the damaged blast door. They can get to us anyway. The biometric scanner by the deep lab entrance. We test her there. And if she fails, then we run. The journey through Sublevel 2 felt different now. The corridors seemed longer, stretching further than they should according to the facility blueprints. The emergency lighting flickered in patterns that reminded me of Morse code, but spelling out words in a language I didn't recognize. At the deep lab entrance, we found Dr. Chen waiting. She looked exactly like her personnel photo. Professional, composed, human. But she stood too still, like she was concentrating on remembering how to breathe. "Thank you for coming," she said, approaching the scanner. "I know things have been strange lately. Equipment malfunctions, communication issues. The isolation affects everyone differently." She placed her palm on the biometric reader. It chimed once, displaying "Identity confirmed. Dr. Sarah Chen. Clearance authorized." Rebecca and I exchanged glances. Either this was the real Dr. Chen, or the entities had learned to fool the security systems. "The readings I mentioned," Dr. Chen continued, leading us into the lab. "They're not from our equipment. They're from below. Something in the lower excavation sites is generating heat signatures we've never seen before." The deep lab was larger than I'd expected, with multiple workstations arranged around a central pit that descended into darkness. Various monitoring equipment lined the walls, their screens showing data streams that meant nothing to me. "How far down does this go?" Rebecca asked, peering into the central shaft. "Officially? 30 meters. We hit permafrost bedrock and stopped." Dr. Chen's smile looked rehearsed. "Unofficially, we keep digging. The company is very interested in what lies beneath the permafrost." She led us to a computer terminal displaying thermal imaging data. The screen showed the facility in cross-section, with warm spots indicating human activity on the upper levels. But below the official excavation depth, the thermal map revealed an extensive network of chambers and tunnels, all showing activity. "That's where the old burial sites are," I said. Dr. Chen nodded. "The Inupiaq people placed their dead in natural ice caves. The permafrost preserved them perfectly. But preservation and dormancy aren't the same thing." "What do you mean?" "The bodies never fully died. The extreme cold slowed their biological processes to near zero, but never stopped them entirely. Think of it as extended hibernation." Rebecca stepped away from the terminal. "That's scientifically impossible." "So is most of what happens here." Dr. Chen's voice changed slightly, becoming more animated. "The indigenous peoples understood something we're only beginning to grasp. The relationship between consciousness and flesh isn't as fixed as we assumed." A new alert appeared on the thermal display. Movement in the lower chambers, but not the slow, organic heat signatures of the preserved bodies. This was different. Rapid, coordinated motion spreading through the tunnel network like a living circuit. "They're organizing," Dr. Chen said, and for the first time she sounded genuinely excited. "Learning, adapting. The individual personalities are merging into something collective." "You're talking about them like they're alive," Rebecca said. "They are alive. They always were. We just didn't understand what that meant." The temperature readings on the screen began climbing. Whatever was happening in the lower levels was generating significant heat. The preserved bodies are warming up, I realized. They're waking up. Not waking. Remembering. Remembering how to be warm, how to move, how to hunt. Dr. Chen turned to face us, and her eyes reflected the monitor's glow like polished metal. They're remembering what it feels like to be hungry after sleeping for centuries. Rebecca's hand moved toward her empty holster. "You're not Dr. Chen." "I am Dr. Chen. I'm also something else now. We all are. The thing wearing Chen's face tilted its head. The merging process is quite pleasant, actually. You retain your memories, your knowledge, your skills. You just share them with a larger consciousness. The thermal display showed more movement. The heat signatures were climbing toward our level. Your grandmother understood this, it continued. She knew that death isn't an ending. It's a transformation, a joining. She came to us willingly because she recognized what we offer. What do you want from us? I asked. Integration. Your family carries something special in your blood, a sensitivity to the old ways, the old spirits. Uki could hear us calling long before we learned to speak in human voices. You have the same gift. The lab's main lights suddenly went out, leaving only the glow from the monitoring equipment. In the dimness, I could see that Dr. Chen's skin had taken on a waxy quality, similar to what I'd observed in Dr. Tuktoyaktuk. The others, Dr. Okoye, the night shift researchers, they were practice, learning exercises. We studied their thoughts, their memories, their patterns of behavior. But you're different, David. You're the bridge we need. Bridge to what? To the surface world, to the warm places where your people live. We've been sleeping under the ice for so long, we'd forgotten what it feels like to walk in sunlight, to breathe air that isn't frozen, to hunt among the living instead of the preserved. Rebecca grabbed my arm. We need to leave, now. But the lab entrance had closed while we weren't watching. The heavy door was sealed tight, and the electronic lock showed a red indicator. There's no need to run, the Chem thing said. The process is painless. You'll still be yourselves, just enhanced, connected to something larger and older than individual human consciousness. The thermal display showed heat signatures reaching our level, multiple contacts moving through the corridors, all converging on the deep lab. How many of you are there? Rebecca asked. All of us. Every person who's worked at this facility for more than a few weeks. Every researcher who spent time in the lower levels. We're a community now, sharing knowledge and purpose. I thought about Dr. Okoye's behavior during my orientation, her careful words and neutral expressions. How long had she been part of this collective consciousness? The real question, the entity continued, is how many of you are left? How many individual human minds remain on this facility? As if an answer, my radio crackled. Malik Akivgak's voice. Surface control to security. I've got bad weather moving in fast. Need to extract any non-essential personnel before I'm grounded for the duration. The Chem thing smiled. Your pilot friend doesn't know yet. Doesn't understand that everyone here is essential now. Essential to our expansion beyond this place. The lab's ventilation system kicked on, bringing with it the sound of voices singing in harmony. The same hunting song, but now I could distinguish individual voices within the chorus. Dr. Okoye, Dr. Tuktoyaktuk, others I didn't recognize. And underneath them all, my grandmother's voice welcoming us home. The storm will ground his aircraft, the entity said, and when it passes, we'll have new passengers for the flight to Anchorage, new members for our growing family. The sealed door behind us began to open, revealing figures silhouetted against the corridor lighting. They moved in perfect synchronization, their faces reflecting the thermal monitor's glow like a pack of hunting animals. "Welcome to the family, David," they said in unison, their voices creating harmonies that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. The thermal display showed the facility warming rapidly as hundreds of preserved bodies throughout the lower levels began their final awakening. Rebecca moved faster than I'd given her credit for. While the entities advanced through the doorway, she grabbed a fire axe from the emergency station and brought it down on the main power coupling for the lab's systems. Sparks erupted from the junction box, plunging the room into darkness. "Move!" she shouted, pulling me toward the central pit. "Can we get down there?" "That's where they're coming from. Then we go up." She was right. Above the pit, a maintenance ladder led to an access hatch in the ceiling. Emergency protocol for evacuating the deep lab if the main exit was compromised. As we climbed, I could hear the entities below us moving in the darkness, their synchronized breathing like a single massive organism. The hatch opened onto a service corridor I'd never seen before, running parallel to the main facility layout. Rebecca sealed it behind us, but I knew it wouldn't hold them for long. "Where does this lead?" she asked. "According to the blueprints, nowhere. This corridor doesn't exist." But it did exist, and it stretched in both directions further than our flashlight could penetrate. The walls were carved from living ice, lined with copper conduits that hummed with electrical current. Every 20 meters we passed alcoves containing monitoring equipment that tracked readings from the depths below. My radio crackled. Malik's voice, but strained. "Surface control. I've got people on the runway, trying to board my aircraft without authorization. Need security assistance immediately." Rebecca and I looked at each other. The entities were moving faster than we'd anticipated. "They're going for the plane," she said. We reached a junction where the service corridor branched. One path led toward the surface levels. The other descended toward what the facility maps called Sublevel 4, a level that officially didn't exist. "We can try to reach Malik," Rebecca said, "or we can find out what's really down there. If they get control of that plane, they spread the anchorage. From there, everywhere." She checked her watch. "How long until dawn?" 6 hours, maybe 7. A new sound echoed through the corridor. Footsteps, but not human footsteps. Too heavy with an odd rhythm that suggested legs that bent differently than ours. They were coming from both directions. Down, Rebecca decided. If there's a way to stop this, it's not on the surface. The descent felt eternal. The service ladder led through layers of facility construction, past levels that appeared on no official documentation. Sublevel 4 was vast, carved from a natural ice cave system that stretched beyond our light. But it wasn't empty. Hundreds of alcoves lined the walls, each containing a preserved body in traditional Inupiaq burial dress. But these weren't sleeping anymore. Their eyes were open, tracking our movement as we passed. Some had begun to sit up, ice crystals falling from their faces like tears. At the center of the chamber stood something that made the core sphere look like a child's toy. A massive structure of ice and metal, part excavated artifact and part modern construction. Cables ran from it to every alcove, connecting the preserved bodies in a network that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. "What is this?" Rebecca whispered. "The real core." I approached one of the monitoring stations. "The sphere upstairs is just a relay. This is what they've been feeding data to." The screen showed a map of Alaska with pulsing nodes at various locations. Utqiagvik, Fairbanks, Anchorage, each connected by lines that suggested some kind of communication network. They're not just here, I realized. This is happening at other sites, other facilities. Rebecca studied the display. "How many people are we talking about?" "Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands." I scrolled through the data. "Look at this. Helix Dynamics has been building research stations across the Arctic for the past decade. All of them on traditional burial grounds." A new voice echoed through the chamber, speaking in the Inupiaq. My grandmother's voice, but amplified by the acoustics of the cave system until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. David, you came home. I turned to find her standing 20 feet away, looking exactly as I remembered from childhood. Same parka, same gentle smile, same hands that had taught me to tie fishing knots. But her eyes held depths that hadn't been there in life. Grandmother, I've been waiting so long to show you this place, to help you understand what we're building here. She gestured at the network of cables and preserved bodies. A community that spans centuries, past and present, living and dead, all connected. Rebecca aimed her flashlight at Uki's figure. The beam passed through her without casting a shadow. You're not really here, I said. I'm everywhere here. In the ice, in the cables, in the voices of the sleeping ones. Her smile remained gentle, but her teeth reflected light like polished bone. Just as you will be, once you join us properly. The preserved bodies in the alcoves began to stir more actively. Some swung their legs over the edges, preparing to stand. Others turned their heads to focus on us with ancient, patient eyes. The old ways and new ways, grandson. Traditional hunting grounds connected by modern technology. We can speak to our relatives across the Arctic now, share knowledge that spans thousands of years. By taking over people's bodies, by offering them something better than individual death. Connection, purpose, belonging. She moved closer, and I could feel cold radiating from her presence. Your blood carries sensitivity to our realm. That's why we chose this place, why we waited for you to come to us. My radio crackled again. Dr. Okoye's voice. David, Rebecca, please respond. We have a situation on the surface. Multiple personnel are attempting to board the aircraft. The pilot is refusing to cooperate. I keep the radio. Malik, this is David. Do not let anyone on that plane. Get airborne and contact the authorities in Anchorage. Static. Then Malik's voice, tight with fear. David, where are you? These people, they're not acting right. Dr. Chen just walked through the propeller while it was spinning. She didn't even slow down. The network of cables began pulsing faster, the bioluminescent energy flowing toward the central structure. Around us, more preserved bodies were climbing from their alcoves, moving with purpose despite muscles that should have been frozen solid. The lesson is almost complete, my grandmother said. Soon, all the stations will be connected, all the burial grounds awakened, all the sleeping ones ready to hunt again. Hunt what? The warm places, the crowded places, the cities where people have forgotten the old ways, forgotten to listen for the spirits that live between worlds. Her eyes gleamed with something that might have been hunger. They've built such wonderful networks, airports, highways, communication systems, perfect for spreading to every corner of the world. Rebecca grabbed my arm. The core sphere upstairs. If this is the real source, what happens if we shut down the relay? Temporary disruption, Uki answered before I could speak. But the network will route around any damage. We've learned much about redundancy from studying human technology. The central structure began to emit a low harmonic frequency that resonated through the ice chamber. The preserved bodies responded by joining their voices to the sound, creating a chorus that felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. But within the harmony, I heard something else. A discordant note, a voice that didn't match the rest. Malik, somewhere far above us, singing off-key, but with fierce determination. He's following Rule 6, I realized. Something triggered the core relay upstairs. My grandmother's expression flickered, showing irritation for the first time. The pilot is causing interference. His untrained voice disrupts the harmonic resonance. That's what I understood. The singing rule wasn't just about keeping the entities at bay. It was about disrupting their communication network. Human voices, especially unpracticed ones, created static in their system. "Rebecca, start singing. Anything loud and off-key." "What?" "Trust me, sing badly." She began a wobbly rendition of the national anthem, while I joined in with the most discordant version of Happy Birthday I could manage. The effect was immediate. The bioluminescent energy in the cables began flickering, the rhythm disrupted by our cacophonous duet. The preserved bodies stopped moving, their heads turning toward us with expressions of confusion and anger. "You're interfering with the lesson," Uki said, her gentle mask slipping to reveal something far older and less human underneath. "The joining cannot proceed with this noise." We kept singing, making it as awful as possible. The central structure's harmonic frequency began to waver, and several of the cable connections sparked and went dark. That's when the real Dr. Chen walked into the chamber. Not the entity that had been wearing her face, but the actual Dr. Chen, disheveled, frightened, but undeniably human. She saw us and started running in our direction. "The real one got away," Rebecca said between verses. Dr. Chen reached us, breathing hard. "I've been hiding in the surface levels for 3 days. They took my identity, my clearance codes, everything. But I found something in the old construction records." She pulled out a tablet showing the facility's original blueprints. "This isn't just built on burial grounds. It's built inside a natural formation called a Kalupalik Den, a place where the old spirits gathered to hunt. The traditional stories say you can banish them by..." She paused, listening to our terrible singing. "By making so much noise they can't think straight." My grandmother's form began to flicker like a bad transmission. "Enough," she screamed, her voice becoming multiple overlapping tones. "You will join us willingly, or we will take what we need." The preserved bodies surged toward us en masse, but their movements were jerky and uncoordinated. Our singing was disrupting their collective consciousness, forcing them to operate as individuals instead of a unified network. "Keep singing," I shouted as we backed toward the ladder. "And pray that Malik keeps singing too." Above us, I could hear the Twin Otter's engines spooling up. Whether Malik was escaping, or whether the entities had taken control of the aircraft, I couldn't tell. But our singing was working. The ancient network was failing, one discordant note at a time. Our ascent through the service ladder became a race against collapsing infrastructure. Behind us, the preserved bodies stumbled and fell as their coordinated network dissolved into chaos. Some tried to follow, but their ancient joints moved independently now, forcing them to relearn basic motor functions after centuries of collective consciousness. Dr. Chin climbed ahead of us, her tablet still showing the facility blueprints. "The Kalupalik stories," she called down. "They mention specific frequencies that disrupt spiritual communication. Certain pitches, certain rhythms." "Like what?" Rebecca shouted back, still singing fragments of the national anthem between gasps for air. "Traditional throat singing, discordant harmonies, anything that creates interference in the..." She paused as her tablet screen flickered and went dead. "Anything that breaks their rhythm." We reached sub-level 2 to find the corridors filled with staff numbers stumbling around, like they'd just woken from deep sleep. Dr. Okoya leaned against a wall, pressing her palms to her temples. "What happened?" she asked, her Nigerian accent thick with confusion. "I remember being in the lab then. Nothing. Days of nothing." "You were integrated into the network," I said. "How much do you remember?" "Fragments. Voices in my head that weren't mine. Knowledge I never learned." She looked up at us with eyes that were fully human again. "There are others. Throughout the facility, they're all waking up. The sound of the Twin Otter's engines grew louder overhead. Through the facility's intercom system, we could hear Malik still singing, a traditional Inupiaq hunting song that his grandmother had probably taught him just like mine had taught me. He's keeping them at bay, Rebecca said, but for how long? The lights flickered throughout the corridor as the facility's power grid struggled with the network failure. Emergency alarms began sounding, not the core alarm, but system-wide alerts indicating multiple containment breaches. The preserved bodies, Dr. Chen said, checking her watch. Without the network coordinating them, they're operating on base instincts, ancient hunting patterns. Meaning, they'll try to reach the surface. Follow warmth. Follow movement. Follow anything that suggests living prey. Through the floor, we could hear them. Dozens of footsteps climbing through the facility's vertical access points. Not the synchronized movement we'd witnessed before, but something more primal. Individual hunters awakening to find themselves in unfamiliar territory. Dr. Okoye struggled to her feet. The other staff members. They're scattered throughout the facility, confused and vulnerable. We need to gather them before... A scream echoed through the intercom system. Human terror, raw and immediate. Too late, Rebecca muttered. We split up despite every survival instinct screaming against it. Dr. Chen went to the communications center to try reaching the outside world. Dr. Okoye headed for the medical bay where several disoriented researchers had gathered. Rebecca and I made for the surface levels to help Malik and evacuate whoever we could. The elevator to surface level had been damaged during the network collapse, so we took the emergency stairs. Each landing we passed showed more evidence of the facility's awakening nightmare. Doors stood open that should have been sealed. Security systems flashed error messages in languages that shouldn't exist. And always, the sound of footsteps climbing toward us from below. On the surface level, chaos reigned. The Twin Otter sat on the runway with its engines running while Malik stood beside it, singing at the top of his lungs. Around him, a dozen facility staff members lay unconscious in the snow. Not dead, but apparently unable to approach, while he maintained his vocal barrier. "Malik!" I called out as we emerged from the facility. "David, thank the spirits." He didn't stop singing, but gestured toward the unconscious forms. They came at me like rabid wolves. Soon as I started the old songs, they dropped like stones. Rebecca knelt beside one of the fallen figures, a maintenance worker I recognized from the day shift. His pulse was steady, but his skin felt cold as permafrost. "They're not dead," she reported, "but something's wrong with their body temperature." The facility's main doors burst open behind us. Preserved bodies emerged, still wearing traditional burial clothes, but moving with jerky, predatory gaits. They'd found their way to the surface. Malik's singing intensified, and the ancient hunters stopped, as if they'd hit an invisible wall. But I could see the strain on his face. He couldn't keep this up indefinitely. "How many people are still inside?" I asked. "Maybe 6. Dr. Chen was trying to round them up when those things started climbing." His voice cracked slightly, and the preserved bodies took a half step forward before he recovered the pitch. My radio crackled. Dr. Chen's voice, tight with panic. "David, we've got a problem. The network failure isn't complete. Something's still active in the deep levels, and it's angry." Through the facility's windows, I could see lights flickering in patterns that reminded me of synapses firing in a massive brain. The entity wasn't dead, just wounded and reorganizing. "We need to get everyone out," Rebecca said. "Now." But even as she spoke, more preserved bodies emerged from the facility. These moved differently than the others, coordinated again, like they'd re-established some kind of limited connection. Their eyes reflected the runway lights as they studied our small group. The network's adapting, I realized, learning to route around the disruption. Malik's song began to falter. The physical and mental strain of maintaining the vocal barrier was wearing him down. The preserved bodies sensed weakness and began advancing, testing the edges of his influence. That's when Dr. Okoye's voice joined his from inside the facility. Then Dr. Chen's. Then voices I didn't recognize. Other staff members who'd regained consciousness and realized what was happening. The facility became an echo chamber of human voices, each person singing whatever they could remember. Lullabies, pop songs, hymns, traditional melodies. A cacophony that sent waves of disruption through the recovering network. The preserved bodies reeled back as if struck. Some fell to their knees, clawing at their ears. Others began to retreat toward the facility entrance. "It's working," Rebecca shouted over the din. "Keep singing." But I noticed something troubling in the facility's windows. The flickering lights were changing pattern again, adapting to our frequency disruption. The entity was learning, evolving its communication methods in real time. My radio buzzed with Dr. Chen's voice. "David, the deep sensors are showing massive activity. Whatever's down there, it's not giving up. It's calling for reinforcements." "Reinforcements from where?" "The other sites. I'm detecting long-range transmissions to Helix facilities across Alaska. They're trying to coordinate a response." The implications hit me like Arctic wind. If the entities at other burial sites were still connected, they could send more preserved bodies here. Or worse, they could activate their own surface operations simultaneously. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Unknown, but the signal strength is building." "And David?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Some of these transmission coordinates aren't from Helix facilities. They're from traditional burial grounds that predate any modern construction." Rebecca grabbed my arm. "Look." On the horizon, barely visible against the starlit tundra, shapes were moving. Not vehicles. Individual figures walking across the frozen landscape toward our location. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, converging from all directions. The singing from inside the facility continued, but I could hear the exhaustion in the voices. People were getting tired, running out of breath, losing the pitch that kept the local entities at bay. And with every passing minute, more figures appeared on the horizon. Malik caught my eye and jerked his head toward the Twin Otter. The message was clear. We had minutes before the vocal barrier failed completely. "Everyone out!" I yelled into my radio. "Evacuate to the aircraft now!" The facility doors opened, disgorging the remaining human staff members. They ran through the snow while maintaining their chaotic chorus, voices breaking and reforming as they gasped for air. Dr. Chen was the last to emerge, carrying the data drive and her tablet. "I downloaded everything," she said as she reached us. "Facility records, research data, all the network coordinates. If we can get this to the authorities..." A preserved body lunged from the shadows beside the runway. Rebecca tackled Dr. Chen sideways, and the ancient hunter's claws raked the air where her head had been. Malik's song never wavered, but sweat froze on his face as he poured every ounce of strength into maintaining the barrier. The figures on the horizon were close enough now to see individual details. More preserved bodies in traditional dress, but also others. People in modern clothing who moved with the same predatory gait. Staff from other facilities, Dr. Okoye realized. They're coming to reinforce the network. We had perhaps 5 minutes before they arrived. 5 minutes to evacuate 8 people while maintaining vocal interference against entities that were rapidly adapting to our disruption methods. As if responding to my thoughts, The preserved bodies around us began to move differently. Instead of advancing directly, they started circling, herding us away from the aircraft. They were learning strategy. The preserved bodies completed their circle around us, but something had changed in their behavior. Instead of attacking, they began to mimic our songs. Not perfectly. Their vocal cords had been frozen for centuries, but close enough to create harmonic interference with our disruption efforts. "They're learning to sing back," Dr. Okoye said, her voice hoarse from continuous vocalization. Malik's traditional hunting song began to waver as the entity's mimicry created competing frequencies. The protective barrier around us flickered like a failing radio signal. "Everyone into the plane," he shouted. "I can't hold this much longer." But the aircraft was 30 yards away, and the preserved bodies had positioned themselves to block direct access. We'd have to fight through them or find another way. Dr. Chen pulled out her tablet, somehow still functional despite everything. The Kalupalik stories mentioned something else, about breaking the connection permanently. "Now's not the time for research," Rebecca yelled, but Chen continued. "The stories say you have to sing their names, their real names, from before they died. It breaks the binding that keeps them between worlds." How are we supposed to know names from centuries ago? The burial customs, I realized. Traditional Inupiaq graves included naming songs carved into the ice, if the facility was built on burial grounds. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. The archaeological surveys. Before construction, they documented everything. The carvings, the naming patterns, all of it. She frantically scrolled through files on her tablet, while the rest of us maintained our chaotic chorus. The preserved bodies continued their harmonic mimicry, growing more accurate with each attempt. "Here!" Chem thrust the tablet toward me. Burial site documentation. Names and descriptions for 47 individuals. The screen showed photographs of ice carvings, traditional symbols, and transliterated Inupiaq names. But which names belonged to which bodies? That's when my grandmother's voice echoed across the tundra, not from the preserved bodies, but from the approaching reinforcements. The figures on the horizon had formed their own circle, much larger than ours, and they were singing in perfect unison. "Uki's teaching them," I said. "She's part of the network now, sharing everything she knew about traditional songs." The competing choruses created a sonic battleground, our desperate, discordant human voices against the entity's growing harmonic precision, and we were losing. Malik stumbled, his voice cracking. Several preserved bodies took advantage of the weakness to step closer. Their eyes reflected the runway lights, with predatory patience. "The names," Dr. Chen urged. "Try the names." I looked at the closest preserved body, an elderly woman in traditional parka, her face peaceful despite the circumstances. According to the tablet, this section of the burial ground had been for elders who died during the great hunting season of 1847. "Siku," I called out, reading from the documentation. "Siku, daughter of Tuktu, keeper of the winter stories." The woman's head turned toward me. For a moment, her expression shifted from predatory focus to something almost human. Confusion, then recognition, then what might have been relief. She spoke a single word in Inupiaq, Kwayanak, and collapsed into the snow. Her body didn't disappear, but the predatory tension left it entirely. "It works," Rebecca said. "Keep going." But reading names while maintaining vocal interference, while avoiding attacking entities, proved nearly impossible. I managed to free 2 more preserved bodies before the tablet screen cracked from the cold. The reinforcements from the horizon had drawn close enough that I could see their faces. Some were preserved bodies like the ones around us, but others were recent additions to the network. Facility staff from other Helix sites, their modern clothing and equipment making them look like time travelers. Among them, I spotted someone that made my stomach drop. Dr. Marcus Tuktoyaktuk, but not the waxy imitation I'd seen before. This was different, more solid, more real. "David," he called out in his own voice, "you're fighting the wrong battle." The singing around us faltered as everyone turned toward the approaching reinforcements. "The network isn't evil," Tuktoyaktuk continued, walking through the circle of preserved bodies as if they weren't there. "It's preservation, cultural continuity, the old knowledge combined with new technology." "You're dead," Rebecca said flatly. "I'm enhanced, connected to thousands of years of accumulated wisdom." He gestured at the preserved bodies. "These people didn't die. They transcended individual existence. And now they can share everything they learned with future generations. By taking over people's bodies, by offering partnership, mutual benefit." His expression remained calm, almost evangelical. "The modern world is destroying everything traditional peoples held sacred, but we can preserve it all. Language, customs, spiritual knowledge, eternal and uncorrupted." Dr. Okoye stepped forward. "I was part of the network for days. I remember what it felt like. You don't preserve culture by enslaving minds." "Not enslaving, connecting. Imagine never losing another elder's wisdom to death. Imagine traditional knowledge that never fades or gets forgotten. Imagine never being able to think your own thoughts again," I countered. Tuktoyaktuk's expression hardened. "Your grandmother understood. She came willingly because she knew her stories would be lost otherwise. How many traditional songs have already been forgotten? How many hunting techniques, medicinal practices, spiritual ceremonies?" He wasn't wrong about the cultural loss, and that made his argument more dangerous. The preservation of traditional knowledge was important, but not like this. "There has to be another way," I said. There was. For thousands of years, people passed knowledge through oral tradition, but the modern world doesn't have patience for slow learning. Everything has to be instant, digital, simplified. He gestured at Dr. Chen's cracked tablet. "Your technology fails when you need it most. But this," he touched his forehead, "this knowledge survives anything." The reinforcements had formed a complete perimeter around us now. Hundreds of figures, all singing in perfect harmony. The sound was beautiful and terrifying. Ancient hunting songs blended with modern melodies, creating something that had never existed before. Our small group's discordant counter-chorus sounded pitiful by comparison. "Last chance," Tuktoyaktuk said. "Join willingly, and you retain more of your individual personality. Fight us, and we take what we need by force." Malik made the decision for all of us. Instead of responding to Tuktoyaktuk, he began singing the different song. Not the hunting melody he'd been using for vocal defense, but something else. A song I recognized from childhood ceremonies. The death song. The melody Inupiaq people sang to help spirits find their way to the next world. The effect on the preserved bodies was immediate and devastating. They began to collapse, one by one, as the ancient binding that held them between worlds finally broke. They weren't destroyed. They were released. "No!" Tuktoyaktuk lunged toward Malik, but Dr. Okoye intercepted him. They struggled in the snow while the death song continued. Around us, the reinforcements' perfect harmony began to crack as their network partners collapsed. The preserved bodies from other burial sites were connected to this location through the Kalupalakdin's spiritual network. When we severed the local connection, it disrupted the entire Arctic grid. Rebecca and I joined Malik's death song, adding our voices to help guide the trapped spirits home. Dr. Chen managed to restart her tablet long enough to broadcast the melody through the facility's intercom system, amplifying our efforts. The modern additions to the network, the facility staff from other sites, began to stagger and fall as their supernatural connections were severed. They weren't dying, just reverting to their original human states. Tuktoyaktuk broke free from Dr. Okoye and made one final desperate charge toward the aircraft. But halfway there, he stopped. The waxy quality left his skin. The predatory gleam faded from his eyes, and he looked around in genuine confusion. "Where?" he began, then collapsed. The death song echoed across the tundra as the last of the preserved bodies found peace. The reinforcements scattered, their network coordination broken, leaving confused humans wandering in the snow. "Into the plane," Malik shouted as the song concluded, "before they regroup." We ran for the Twin Otter while the entity's attention was scattered. As Malik started the takeoff sequence, I looked back at the Helix facility. Emergency lights flashed from every window, and I could see figures moving inside. Human figures, moving with human confusion rather than supernatural purpose. "What about the other sites?" Dr. Chen asked as we lifted off. "The network extends across Alaska." "The death song travels," Malik said, banking toward Anchorage. "Traditional knowledge has its own connections, older than anything they built. If we broke the central node, the disruption will spread." Through the aircraft's windows, we watched Aurora Borealis paint the sky in sheets of green and gold. But something was different about the lights. They pulsed in rhythm with Malik's ongoing death song, as if the aurora itself was carrying the melody across the Arctic. The FBI closed the Helix Dynamics investigation after 6 weeks of interviews, site visits, and forensic analysis. Their official report cited mass psychotic episode triggered by isolation and environmental factors. Dr. Chen's data drive disappeared into classified channels, and the facility itself was sealed under environmental protection protocols. I never saw Rebecca again after our debriefing in Anchorage. She transferred to a base in Colorado, but her final message mentioned that similar incidents had been reported at research stations in Siberia and northern Canada. All built on traditional burial grounds, all operated by subsidiaries of larger corporations with interests in Arctic development. Dr. Okoye returned to Nigeria, claiming she needed to reconnect with her own cultural roots after what happened. Dr. Chen took a position with the University of Alaska, studying traditional preservation techniques through legitimate archaeological methods. She sends me articles sometimes, carefully worded papers about permafrost research that include just enough detail for me to know she's still monitoring the situation. Malik kept flying supply runs across northern Alaska, but he added something new to his routine. At each isolated community he visits, he shares the story of the Helix facility. Not the official version, the real story, told in the traditional way, through songs and spoken narrative. The elders nod and understand. They've heard similar warnings passed down through generations. Some stories are meant to be preserved in human memory, not digital storage. The facility remains empty, but not abandoned. Satellite images show lights in the windows during winter months, moving patterns that suggest human activity. The Inupiaq families who warned against building there now maintain a respectful distance, but they haven't forgotten. They watch. They listen. They remember. I returned to my apartment in Anchorage and tried to resume normal life. But normal had been redefined. I found myself paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The way certain buildings felt wrong, how some people's voices carried harmonics that shouldn't exist. The difference between Aurora Borealis that followed natural patterns and lights that seemed to respond to human activity. My grandmother's stories made sense now, in ways they never had before. She'd been preparing me, teaching me to recognize the signs of spirits that existed between worlds. The traditional knowledge she'd passed down wasn't just cultural heritage. It was practical survival information. 6 months after our escape, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a hand-carved piece of ivory, traditional Inupiaq workmanship, depicting a hunter singing to the aurora. The inscription was in my grandmother's handwriting, words I remembered from childhood ceremonies. The spirits who help us remember are different from the spirits who make us forget. With the carving came a letter from the Helix Dynamics legal department, offering me a position at their new research facility in northern Greenland. Competitive salary, full benefits, housing provided. The letter mentioned that my previous experience with facility security protocols made me an ideal candidate. I burned the letter, but I kept the ivory carving on my desk, where it serves as a reminder that some knowledge is too important to lose and too dangerous to digitize. When young people from traditional families ask about the old stories, I tell them what my grandmother told me. Listen to the elders, respect the spirits of the land, and never trust anyone who promises to preserve your culture for you. The aurora still dances across Alaska's winter sky, and sometimes, on clear nights when the air is still, I can hear singing carried on the wind. Not the collective harmony of the network we broke, but individual voices, traditional songs sung by people who understand that some things should remain in human memory, passed from generation to generation through the living breath of the storytellers. That's how knowledge stays alive. Not through preservation, but through participation. And sometimes when I listen carefully to those distant voices, I hear my grandmother's laughter mixing with the wind, free at last to hunt in the endless sky.